Thank you so much for you all who are joining us today. I'm going to try to share my screen again here. Okay, great. So thank you all for joining us today. This is the Cash and Voucher Assistance and Gender-Based Violence webinar series that is happening through January and February, and this is the second in the series. So just as a reminder, the Gender and Cash sub-workstream is a sub-workstream of the Cash workstream of the Grand Bargain, and the focus is on policy, practice, and research on gender and cash and voucher assistance. So the webinar series is happening over 7 Thursdays at this time, from the 16th of January to the 27th of February. This webinar will be about 60 minutes. You will be muted during the presentation, although myself and Tenzin, the other co-hosts, will be able to talk, but we will give you a chance to talk at the end for your questions. Please do use the chat for questions, and the recording will be sent out at the end so you can share it back out to your colleagues as well. So today we're going to talk about the Cash and Voucher Assistance and Gender-Based Violence Compendium, specifically looking at the training modules, the why, the what, and the experience that we have from piloting these materials. So the speakers, one of them is me, and I am the Cash and Markets Technical Advisor from CARE. I co-lead the Gender and Cash sub-workstream for the Grand Bargain along with our colleagues in UN Women. And I have, for 2 decades, been working in humanitarian development contexts with experience in Latin America, Africa, and Middle East. Tenzin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Tenzin Manel. I am Senior Technical Advisor for Cash and Livelihoods with the Women's Refugee Commission. In addition to my role there, I co-chair the GBC task team on cash for protection. Back to you, Holly.
Okay. So just an overview of our webinar. We'll talk a bit about the compendium. For some of you, it might be new. Why we need it, who is it for, and how it will help you to do your work. We'll do an overview on the training modules, and we'll have some observations from our pilot training that Tenzin and I were able to co-facilitate in Nairobi, and the adaptations that were made at that time. And then we'll move on to your questions and any comments. We have some guiding questions for you at that point. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tenzin.
Thanks so much, Holly. If you could advance 1 slide. So we're going to start discussing what is the compendium. So it's a guidance document which focuses on the integration of gender-based violence prevention, mitigation, and response with cash and voucher assistance. It is a collaborative effort. 15 different organizations under the leadership of CARE USA fed into the development of the document. And this group of 15 different organizations is known as the GBV Advisory Group to the IASC GBV Guidelines Reference Group. The guidance is structured around 2 pillars. The first, GBV risk mitigation, and second, using CVA to deliver on GBV prevention outcomes and in response to GBV. Each pillar is then structured around the steps of the project cycle, and there are 3 different parts to the guidance. Part 1 is for everyone. It addresses GBV as a collective responsibility in humanitarian emergencies. Accountability to affected populations is cross-cutting across the guidance. Part 2 is for CVA or sector specialists, coordinators, and donors. This section focuses on key considerations for integrating GBV risk mitigation into the delivery of cash and voucher assistance. And the third and final part is for GBV specialists, coordinators, and donors. This section focuses on key considerations for using cash and voucher assistance as part of specialized GBV programming. And then throughout the document, knowing that we've made some significant headway around this integration, but there's still work to be done, evidence to be gathered, there are promising practice, lessons learned, highlighted throughout the document. Next slide, Holly.
Oops, sorry.
No problem. Thanks. So why do we need this compendium and the training? WRC research scoping current practice regarding the integration of cash and voucher assistance in GBV programming indicates that this integration has yet to be widely addressed. Cash, gender, and GBV actors are siloed both within their agencies and across communities of practice. And this situation impedes clarity amongst these actors around their roles and responsibilities, addressing the integration of cash and voucher assistance and gender-based violence prevention, mitigation, and response. And as such, the development of successful approaches needs a bit more momentum, a bit more attention in order to ensure effective coordination efforts. There's also prevailing anxiety about integrating cash and voucher assistance and GBV programming. Some GBV actors are concerned that cash itself is risky, although evidence demonstrates that it is not riskier by nature than in-kind assistance, for example. And also some cash actors feel that the protection sector is intimidating, gender-based violence in particular is intimidating, and this reticence inhibits actors from working together to develop their skills and build the evidence and practice to move forward. And there are significant research gaps which represent challenges to generating this learning and building evidence, including humanitarian staff knowledge, skills, attitudes, as well as funding for this particular integration. There's persistence of poor practice, which undercuts the potential of cash. There's a consistent lack of gender and protection analysis, perpetuation of a one-size-fits-all approach to programming, although we know that we need to tailor cash and voucher assistance. There are opportunities which are missed to pair cash with complementary services, so looking at Cash Plus for gender transformative and protective outcomes, and also a failure to establish and utilize gender-based violence referral pathways. Cash staff are often untrained in the basics of gender. Rarely they're trained in protection systematically, especially at the field level. And even more rarely, they're trained on GBV, including central aspects such as the survivor-centered approach, which is critical to appropriately tailoring cash for GBV survivors. And GBV staff are often untrained on the other side in the basics of cash and voucher assistance. They're unfamiliar with how, when, and why cash would be delivered in different settings, and this impedes the process of identifying different entry points for integrated programming. Training materials, which we're going to be speaking about today, which address the integration of cash and voucher assistance and GBV, is a significant gap, which has been identified by both HQ and field-based practitioners. And GBV and cash practitioners really need practical field resources for staff capacity building, which we're happy to deliver to you today, as well as assessment and monitoring, which the compendium itself addresses. Holly, could you please advance the slide? Thanks. So I spoke about this a little bit already, but the audience of the compendium is as follows. First, field-based humanitarian practitioners across all areas or sectors of humanitarian response who will consider using cash and voucher assistance in their programming, GBV specialists who are considering using CVA in their programming, members of the humanitarian country team, and humanitarian coordinators and donors who advise and monitor teams and partners on GBV mainstreaming and integration. Thanks. So the compendium is a companion guide. It's not intended to substitute or eclipse any of the other significant guidance out there around GBV and cash. It is a companion to key guidance, including the ISC guidelines on integrating GBV interventions in humanitarian action, the recently published minimum standards for GBV in emergencies, the CALP Program Quality Toolbox, as well as the WRC IRC Mercy Corps Toolkit on cash and GBV. So what will practitioners accomplish by using the compendium? You'll be able to differentiate between GBV risk mitigation and CVA and potential ways that CVA can contribute to GBV prevention and response. You'll be able to identify practical actions that CVA or sector specialists can take to identify and mitigate the risks of GBV in CVA. And you'll also be able to identify practical actions that GBV specialists can take to incorporate CVA in GBV programming where it's assessed to be appropriate. So the compendium includes two tools, the modality decision tree, which you see on the screen before you, and the GBV risk analysis tool for CVA, which we'll display next. These tools help you to weigh the options during response analysis, assessments, analysis, and planning phases of cash and voucher assistance and the encompassing program that is utilizing CVA. The modality decision tree helps you to think about whether risks are specific to CVA as a modality or not. You'll be asking yourself questions like, would the same risks be present if in-kind assistance were used? Would the choice between cash and voucher assistance, cash and vouchers make a difference? Or would it be better to avoid direct assistance altogether and focus only on service delivery? This step should be completed in consultation with communities. Next slide, please. So the second tool within the compendium is the GBV risk analysis tool. It helps you to address the questions which I just raised in more depth to determine if GBV risks are specific to CVA, to the modality, to the delivery mechanism, transfer frequency, etc., and helps you to adjust those aspects as necessary. This step helps you to identify how CVA delivery could be made safer, as well as how CVA, together with other programming components, could help to mitigate GBV risks. This step should also be completed in consultation with communities and followed up with a final decision on modality choice. So very strongly invite you, warmly and strongly invite you to look at the compendium, look at these tools, and also look at the training materials, which Holly is going to present to you next. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Tenzin, for that. I will just add that the compendium is in French, Spanish, and in Arabic as well, and we will share all of those links for you at the end. So I'm going to talk a bit about the training now and the modules that have been designed. So as an overview, there is an accompanying facilitator's guidance for the entire suite of materials, and this guidance gives an overview of the materials and hyperlinks to other resources. So it's meant to be used no matter which module you're deciding to go ahead with, and help you to design, to facilitate, and organize the trainings. There are separate handouts for tools, and there's also a glossary, which is, can come in handy for our different populations that we're working with. So everyone knows what all the acronyms are across the GBV specialists and the sector and cash specialists. And then there, in each module, there are specific facilitators guides for each activity and PowerPoints that follow. And there are also accompanying activities. So, what are the modules? They follow a similar path, so they have 4 to 6 different groups to them. So they are, first they start out with an introduction, then they go into situation analysis, into design, implementation, monitoring, and an action plan. And so these are all the elements that you will follow, irrespective of the audience. And there are different learning pathways, and we'll go into this a little bit more when I talk about the modules, but just so you know that, based on this color combination, you can actually combine the 3 different modules in 5 different ways, depending on the needs of the learners, and also what you're hoping to be able to achieve and who might be in the room. So this is this accompanies in the materials as well. So the first module, which follows the compendium in terms of the different sections that Tenzin talked about, is the one for HCT, Cluster Coordinators, donors, and this can be for generalists on your teams as well. And so there are 3 learning objectives for this, and they are to be able to use the key GBV and CVA terms and concepts, to be fluent, again, in the acronyms, but also what is behind them, to discuss the importance of GBV risk mitigation across the different steps of the project cycle, because they can be quite different depending on when we're diving into that, and to identify the specific importance of GBV risk mitigation when CVA is used to deliver on sectoral and multi-sectoral responses. This module, if it's done overall, it's 3 hours. And what are we hoping that they will get out of it? What is kind of they'll understand at the end? So essentially, we want to make sure that they know why it is important to be able to to mitigate for GBV risk mitigation in cash and voucher assistance, to advocate for it at their levels, make sure that it is funded, and make sure that it is discussed. The second module is what we're calling for humanitarian practitioners. Mainly, it's focused on for our colleagues that work in sectors, so technical specialists, and also for cash and voucher assistants or cash and market specialists. So this has 4 learning objectives. So to be able to use key GBV and CVA terms and concepts. Now we know that if they're going to be cash specialists in the room, they might understand the terms for CVA, but they might be less familiar with GBV. So it's important that we understand when we're talking about GBV, what are we really talking about? We want them to be able to differentiate between GBV risk mitigation in cash and voucher assistance and also potential ways in which cash and voucher assistance can contribute to prevention and response. And this is a particular area where, as Tenzin had said, that really we need to have a growing body of evidence. The third learning objective is that they're able to identify existing support for identification and mitigation of GBV risks. So these are looking at tools and technical support provided by GBV specialists, which this group of professionals may not be as aware of. And lastly, for them to be able to implement practical actions to identify and mitigate the risks of GBV and CVA. This is something that we see that, unfortunately, GBV risks exist in all of our humanitarian responses. So this, and at the same time, cash and voucher assistance is increasing, but we'd like to see that they are going at the same rate. The total time requirement for this, including lunch and breaks, would be about 8 hours. And at the end of it, we really hope that the learners will be able to mitigate the GBV risk in all sectors or across multi-sectoral cash interventions. Moving on to the last is for GBV specialists. So we have 3 key learning objectives for this module. The first is that, that GBV and CVA terms and concepts are understood. Again, this is the other way around. Maybe we have the GBV specialists are less aware of cash and voucher assistance, and it really takes quite a dive to make sure that those terms are well understood. Also, we want to make sure that they consider the use of CVA in their GBV programming. And then lastly, to advise technical specialists on using CVA to deliver the sector and multi-sectoral responses when appropriate. When we're looking at using cash and voucher assistance in GBV case management, of course, we want to make sure that the GBV specialists are able to speak the same language and guide their colleagues who are other technical specialists in making the best decisions. So this has also a time requirement of 8 hours, so another full day. And the learning outcome that we want to be able to see, or the change we want to see, is that they can incorporate the use of cash and voucher assistance when appropriate in GBV case management. So I'm going to talk a bit about the pilot training. Important to point out is that UNHCR funded this curriculum that we have developed, and WRC and CARE worked on developing, piloting, and revising this with support from our consultant, which was Key Aid Consulting. And we also were incorporating the input from key informants to help at the design stage to make sure that the materials that we are working on would be the best fit for field practitioners based on their needs, and also to include relevant materials and also make reference to them. As Tenzin had pointed out, this has been a collaborative effort, which is supposed to be a companion to existing trainings. So what did we see? So we had 3 different trainings in Nairobi in November. We had 39 participants, and a larger spread of female, but a pretty good percentage of males in our training. We had a really incredible spread of agencies, over 28 agencies, and a few independent consultants in the group. And an interesting mix of context represented. We had from East Africa, but also from the Middle East and in South Asia, and those that were working at the regional and the global level. So some really interesting perspectives were brought into the room and really practical for us to be able to learn with the learners. So who were the trainees? We had a large percentage of INGOs. but also a good representation from UN, a little bit in local NGOs and donors. In the other category, we had some independents, and we also had some representatives that were working with the government as well. And across kind of the background of the trainees, it was a pretty good split across generalists, GBV specialists, and sector specialists. So what are some of the things that we saw and lessons learned that we took from the training? There's very high demand for this training in the world. We were actually overwhelmed by the number of people that signed up. There were over 100 people that had requested to be considered, and we had to really go in and see who potentially could contribute to this. Because we were not offering any funding for the trainees, we also had to really make that quite clear. But a lot of people want to know about this. When the training was delivered, it was very well received, and there were high levels of satisfaction at the point of evaluation. We did extend the first module, the one that's HCT Coordinator SMT, by about 1/3. It's very difficult to do in a short period of time. But we also made some additions to the other modules to enrich them in terms of adding materials in as well. We also worked on this material, adapted the materials to provide the 5 learning pathways, which I showed you before on the, over the time frame, to make sure that people can mix and match based on what their needs are. And we also made a recommendation to have an optional complementary training of a 1-day workshop with GBV and sector specialists to be able to come together, talk about their learning, and also work on their action plans. What are some of the next steps that we have with these training modules? We are in the process of finalizing the French, Spanish, and Arabic versions. And these are meant to be open source, to be posted online, and we will be working with colleagues so Kaya Connect is where you'll find a lot of humanitarian materials up there on training. It is kind of the go-to place for CALP materials. So we will be seeing if we can post there, and also in discussion with colleagues who are represented in the GBV AOR. And then we have a plan to roll out the training, not just have our single pilot in Nairobi, but we're looking for collaboratively seeking funding to be able to do that. Potentially developing complementary materials like a training the trainers or online module, engaging the communities of practice as well. And so that would be both CASH and also GBV, seeing how we can do that at different regional levels throughout the world, and working through national CASH working groups, the protection cluster, and the GBV working groups at those national or response levels. So with that, I will leave these questions up for you. And also if you have any other comments or questions, but kind of 3 areas that we're focusing on are: what guidance can you share for training rollouts for widest reach and support localization? What has been your experience so far in utilizing the compendium? What are some of the opportunities you see, the benefits, the challenges? And lastly, what can you do to get uptake at your region, response, country, or agency level? So I am going to stop share. I'll put this into the chat so that you all can answer. And I will also unmute you. So if you just give me 1 second to be able to do this. There you go. And so I will now allow you to unmute yourself. So if you have something that you want to share, please feel free. You should be able to unmute yourself and ask a question. And you can see the questions in the chat now.
Maybe while folks are thinking about how they'd like to respond to the questions or ask other questions of us as well, Holly, I just want to emphasize the modularity. Again, those different learning pathways. We recognize that for especially field folks, it's challenging to carve out big chunks of time. And so these can also be approached in sections, fitted into other events and trainings as well, right? We would hope, for example, trainings on GBV might splice in some of these materials, and vice versa for cash trainings, key opportunity to incorporate some of these materials as well as doing standalone, where you bite off the whole chunk.
Thanks, Tenzin. I think that's a really important issue. We often see that with trainings, we don't have one day. So maybe, we can find an hour over a few weeks to be able to build the capacity of our teams. So any thoughts on the questions that we have? Any experiences that people have with the compendium? Or questions that you have about it? Shall I take that there are no questions or comments?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I certainly can. Please go ahead.
Hi. Hi, this is Gayatri Patel. I'm calling in from CARE. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how donor countries have reacted to the compendium and to this work stream generally. Are they embracing it, or is there still a little bit of hesitance on their side to fund programs like this, or programs that include cash and voucher assistance?
Thank you for that question. I'd say that, and Tenzin, please do complement this, I'd say that the compendium itself has been very well received by bilateral donors, both in North America and also in Europe, and that they have seen the importance of it. I would say that in terms of GBV risk mitigation, there is definitely interest in that. We still see a bit of a slow uptake related to using cash in GBV case management. That is from the experience from CARE, I can say. Do you want to add anything to that, Tenzin?
Sure, just that the WRC Mercy Corps IRC Toolkit, for example, was funded by PRM, and CARE has funded this compendium. We've also received some funding from Sweden to apply both the compendium and the toolkit in Ecuador. That's going to be featured later in the webinar series. We'll share learning from that experience, but as Holly shared, just to emphasize this point, there's still, I think, insufficient focus both from donors and practitioners to look at how cash can be a tool where appropriate, it may not always be, to support GBV prevention and response. And one of the challenges, I think, is that while implementing agencies will have funding to implement cash and voucher assistance for multi-sector outcomes or other sectoral outcomes beyond protection, there still needs to be a lot more attention, a lot more funding to support cash for protection outcomes. I know that this is a struggle amongst different member agencies within the GPC task team on cash for protection. We're doing our best with donor colleagues as well to gather evidence, look at what are the gaps both in evidence and in practice, and then be able to take it forward. But that we do need those nuts and bolts of funding, as well as practitioner knowledge and skills, through which we hope this training will really support that point, to really gain traction, have it be really applied widely at scale.
Maybe if I can just add that in terms of the uptake of the compendium, across the different partners, it's been very interesting. Like I said, UNHCR and Liz, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you're on the call, has helped us to also do the translations, but also make these this compendium training series, which is very interesting. We've had a lot of interesting interaction with UNFPA as well. So I'd say at the UN level, we've had a lot of good cross-fertilization there.
Thank you.
Are there other thoughts on terms of how can we make, our big concern is to make sure this gets into the right hands of our field practitioners. And so those of you that are working at response level or who are working specifically on topics related to cash or GBV, we really welcome your input.
Yeah, good morning, Holly. Hi, everyone. This is Sahara from CALP. In terms of uptake, I'll recommend also having sessions within the cash working groups, or having a session for the cash working group leads to have within their agendas discuss the compendium, I think, so that there's wider reach of the community of practice.
Thank you, Sahara. And Sahara was very thoughtful to extend that opportunity for me to be able to do that when I was in Nairobi at another point, not doing the pilot training, but we did discuss it. And I think that we had a really good turnout, Sahara, right, from practitioners who are working in East Africa.
Yes.
So yeah, we are really interested to be able to do that, and because it is in different languages. Also, Lucia is online. I don't know if you want to talk about the opportunity that we had in Quito as well to talk about the compendium. Can I put you on the spot, Lucia? I'm not sure if you want me to put you on the spot, but okay. We also were able to present this. I was able to present it in Quito in December, and we did a sort of a taster to the training, where we had representatives from the cash working group to get a sense of how can we use these tools in what is growing as modalities of choice within in Ecuador.
Holly, I'm just going to read Margaret's comment.
Okay, please do.
In the chat. So Margaret from DCA in Uganda has shared the following. In regards to localization, if funds allow, you could go ahead and conduct hands-on capacity building, the trainer of trainers from different organizations implementing CTP that will be able to transfer the knowledge widely in their areas of operation. This is a really great recommendation. We hope to partner with you on this in the near future. We definitely see that a TOT version of this would be really helpful to facilitate wide cascade of these materials. So thanks so much for your recommendation.
Absolutely, that's great. Are there other thoughts or experiences in using the compendium that that you all would like to share? Okay, I'm going to take that silence as no at this point, but we really appreciate your participation on this webinar. We will be circulating this, and we do hope that you can share it back out to your colleagues in the field to get them interested. And if you do have specific requests at your, there's a question here, but I think I'm going to wrap up. Dennis is talking a bit about meal. If you've talked about operational peer review and evaluation perspective, it would be good to know unknowns. That is what not thought of before. I'm not sure that I fully understand that, Dennis. But maybe if...
I'll just say quickly, Holly, but that both the compendium and documents that it links to, for example, the WRC, Mercy Corps IRC toolkit, address M&E as part of the program cycle. There are practical tools to be able to carry out those activities. So welcome you to look at those, and please be in touch with Holly and I with any questions that you may have.
Yeah, great. So I think he's asking about adapting to changing context. Yes, well, we do, of course, recommend that all the tools would be adapted to the context. And I do encourage you to be on the webinar that we will do from the experience in Ecuador, because that's exactly what we were able to do. Okay, we're active in the chat now as I try to close. Doreen from DCA Uganda says that the compendium, she suggests if we have some case scenarios to bring out clearly how GBV is real in CBA. Well, that's something that we do hope that we can do moving ahead. The evidence review was not as fruitful as we would have liked, and that's why we encourage you to be able to share back out information that you have on your experiences. So that it can be more useful and more grounded for folks. I'm going to wrap up though. We will share this out. We will share the links to the compendium in the different languages, and then we will also, once posted, we will share the links to the materials, and do feel free to be in touch with Tenzin and I to be able to see how you can use them, and if there are special requests at your response, regional or agency level, we're really happy to be able to help in that dissemination. Without further ado, then I will say thank you. And we look forward to seeing you next week at this time. If you speak French, to be able to look at another webinar. Otherwise, the next one will be in English the week after. Have a great day or great evening.
Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, bye.